have a reading that is taken from 2 Kings chapter 14, verses 1 to 22. We're very fortunate to have Brother Jamin Ryan to exhort us this morning, and we'll invite him now to come forward and deliver his exhortation as we prepare for partaking of the bread and wine.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Brother Barry, and good morning, brothers and sisters and young people. Lovely to see everybody here. A couple of apologies before I start. Firstly, to the senior Sunday school class who may have heard some of this material before, so bear with it if you have. And also to Matt and Jordan, who may have heard some of this material also in a Moorebank young people's class. So apart from that, I think everybody else should be clear. Amatz Yah, strengthened of Yah, 2 Kings 14. This is Amaziah, Amatz Yah in Hebrew. King Amaziah. He had some amazing adventures, and dare I say it, it's a rollicking good story. And some things that went on in his life you wouldn't believe. And I just wonder if Amaziah had the chance to look at some of our lives. He may not believe some of the things that go on in our lives either. But look, all I really want to do this morning is look at a story. It's a story of a man. And it's a man who struggled with himself. It's a man who struggled with what happened to him. He struggled with unbelievable family circumstances that were thrust upon him. And he made mistake after mistake. But he did a few things right. And I wonder if that sounds familiar. Look how 2 Kings 14 describes him in the story, verse 3. He did that which was right in the sight of Yahweh. Not like his father David, but he did according to all things as Joash his father did. How would you like God to talk about you that way? That you did all things right in my sight. Oh, there were mistakes as well. Sure, look at the next verse, verse 4. The high places were not taken away. The people did sacrifice and burn incense on the high places. Not a good verse in the story. What were the influences in the story of Amatz Yah? I want to look at the influences in his life. And while we're doing that, I want us to think about the influences in our life. Because you can't overestimate the power of bad influence in your life. And you can't underestimate the influence of the good influence, the power of good influence in your life. So somebody once said that influence is much more powerful than power. And that power is basically powerless compared to influence. And in this royal family of Amaziah, you've got both. You've got power and influence. So let's have a look at the backstory to King Amaziah's life and unpack some of his background and family. We've all got background and family. We've all probably got a backstory. And let's try and understand a little bit of what Amaziah is born into, the circumstances he inherits. Amaziah's life starts off with a bit of a bang, but it's quite some time before he's born. It involves Jehu. Who remembers Jehu? Jehu was a captain in King Ahab's army. And remember Elisha? Who was Elisha? Well, he was the prophet of God after Elijah. And Elisha gets an instruction from God. Let's have a look. We'll take up the story. 2 Kings chapter 9, verse 1. And Elisha the prophet called one of the children of the prophets and said unto him, Gird up thy loins and take this box of oil in thy hands and go to Ramoth Gilead. What's probably going on? Well, Jehu is about to be anointed king. Verse 5. And he came, behold, to the captain of the host was sitting there, and he said, I have an errand to thee, O captain. And Jehu said, to which of us? And he said, to you, O captain. Verse 6, and he arose and went into the house and poured the oil on his head and said, Yahweh, God of Israel, I have anointed thee over the king over the people of Yahweh, even over Israel. What's his mission? His mission is to destroy the house of the current king, Jehu's master, King Ahab. Verse 7, and thou shalt smite the house of Ahab thy master, that I may avenge the blood of my servants the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of Yahweh at the hand of Jezebel. Verse 8, for the whole house of Ahab shall perish, and I will cut off from Ahab every man. Or the colourful language in the KJV. Now let's cut a long story short here. Jehu is anointed to destroy Ahab's house. He turns up to do the job. And the first cab off the rank is Ahab's son, King Joram. King Joram, he's paying a visit. Have a look at 2 Kings 9, verse 15. King Joram had come to be healed in Jezreel from some wounds he'd received from the Syrians. So verse 16 of 2 Kings 9, Jehu rode in a chariot and went to Jezreel, and Joram was there. Well, such bad luck, brothers and sisters. Because verse 16, our guy Amaziah, this is the time of his father Ahaziah. He's the king of Judah. He's come to visit his good mate Joram, who is Ahab's son, just when Jehu's turning up. That's got to be the worst luck ever. And verse 16, Ahaziah, king of Judah, was come to see Joram. Verse 17, and the watchman on the tower spied the company of Judah, and Joram says, well, why don't we go and meet them? Ask them if it's peace. So verse 18, Jehu basically says, mind your own business. Get out of my way. And verse 19, they send out a second messenger. The same thing happens. And verse 20, the watchman says, it's definitely Jehu. He's a mad driver. And verse 21, Joram says, well, let's go and meet him. And you wouldn't believe where. You would not believe where they meet him. Who's Joram? He's the son of Ahab. Where did Jehu meet Joram? Verse 21. Right in the very land that Ahab and Jezebel stole from Naboth after murdering him. Verse 22, he says, is it peace, Jehu? How could it be peace? They're standing in Naboth's vineyard. Jehu roars at him, what peace? So long as the whoredoms of your mother Jezebel and her witchcrafts are so many. Wow. Verse 23, 2 Kings 9, verse 23, Joram sees the trap. He says, run, Ahaziah. Run, it's a trap. And as cool as a kiwi, Jehu draws his bow to its full strength, lets it go, straight through the heart of Joram, king of Ahab, first cab off the rank. And I love this next verse. Verse 26, God says, it's only yesterday that I saw the blood of Naboth and his sons on this soil, says God. Verse 27, when Ahaziah, the king of Judah, saw this, he runs as fast as he can out to the greenhouse. But Jehu follows him and says, get him too. And they get him. But why? His job was to knock off Ahab's house. Why is he killing Ahaziah? Ahaziah is a king of Israel. Ahab was a king of Israel. Why is he killing a king of Judah? Wasn't Jehu's job to get rid of Ahab's house, who's the kings of Israel? Well, do you know who Ahaziah's father was? It was King Jehoram. And Jehoram was married to a lovely lady called Athaliah. And do you know who Athaliah was? She was the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. And unfortunately, Ahaziah is Ahab's grandson. Have a look at 2 Kings 8, verse 18. Jehoram walked in the ways of the kings of Israel as he did the house of Ahab. For the daughter of Ahab was his wife. and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. So Ahaziah, this is our guy Amaziah, that's his grandfather. He was married to Ahab and Jezebel's daughter Athaliah, and that makes Ahaziah Ahab's grandson. Now, if you can imagine having Queen Jezebel for your grandmother, there's only one thing worse than that, and that is having Queen Athaliah as your mother. She was worse than Jezebel. She was disgusting. Do you know what Queen Athaliah, the daughter of Jezebel, was famous for? Well, number one, she was the only queen who reigned in all the kings, the history of the monarchy of Israel. The only queen in her own right. Jezebel, of course, was a queen. The only queen in her own right. But that's not what she was famous for. She was famous for how she got to be the queen. You won't believe it. Have a look at 2 Kings 11, verse 1. This is how Athaliah, Jezebel's daughter, got to be the queen. What did she do? Well, in 2 Kings 11, verse 1, when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she got up, and what did she do? She destroyed all the seed royal. Who were the seed royal? Her grandchildren. Her son's children. Ahaziah's children. All David's seed. She's a child killer. Now, 1 Kings 8 verse 25 says, well, there's a problem with killing all of David's seed, because in Kings 8 verse 25, it says, God says, there shall not fail a man in my sight to sit upon the throne of Israel. She wanted to wipe them all out in one go, and she attempted to. Fortunately, however, Ahaziah's sister was around. Her name was Jerosheba, verse 2. 2 Kings 11, verse 2. Jerosheba, the daughter of King Joram, sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, Ahaziah's son, stole him from the king's sons which were slain, and hid him, even him and his nurse, in the bedchamber from Athaliah, so he wasn't slain. And verse 3, hid him for 6 years. So Jerosheba, Ahaziah's sister, the baby Joash's auntie, and the wife of the high priest Jehoiada, took the infant Joash and hid him and his nurse in a bedroom. Now, Joash is later smuggled out of the castle. He's taken to the temple. He remained hidden for 6 years, and while Queen Athaliah, his grandmother, introduced full Baal worship everywhere. As I said, she was worse than Jezebel. Now, you can imagine how the faithful could not wait for Queen Athaliah to be got rid of. And as soon as he was 7, Jehoiada the high priest took him and pronounced that he was the king at 7 years of age. And Athaliah screams treason. And they say, put her in handcuffs, drag her out, execute her. That's exactly what happened. And then this interesting verse, 2 Kings 11, verse 20. The people of the land rejoiced. The city was quiet. They slew Athaliah with the sword beside the king's house. The people were so glad that she was gone. It's a tough old society, though. Kings and queens come and go, and it wasn't very long before Joash himself was assassinated. And this is Amaziah's dad. This is the guy we want to talk about this morning, King Amaziah. This is his family circumstances. This is the history he inherited. Amaziah, as we said before, means strengthened of Yahweh. Very unique name. Just have a quick look at Psalm 80, verse 17. Psalm 80, verse 17. It says this, let thy hand be upon the man of thy right hand, upon the Son of Man, whom thou madest strong for thyself. Who's this verse referring to ultimately? It's referring to Jesus. Jesus is the man that God made strong for himself to defeat sin. And that word made strong is the Hebrew Amatz. Same word. The name Amaziah is actually a description of Christ. And as a minimum, it's a description of us. We, brothers and sisters, are the people that God is strengthening to overcome and to enter his kingdom. Amaziah's story is our story. Amaziah has lessons for us. So many lessons on so many levels. And I think one of the relevant lessons is the lesson of influence. Let's have a look at who influenced Amaziah. Let's talk about his family history for a second. He's a king, Amaziah. What number king is he? Does anybody know? He's king number 11. And if we had to summarize the family in which he came down in, let's start with the kings after Solomon. What would we say? Well, let's start with, who was Solomon's son? Rehoboam. Let's start with Rehoboam. Now, Rehoboam is his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. You don't have to look these up, but just listen to the language. 2 Chronicles 12 verse 14 says he did evil because he prepared not his heart to receive God. Let's go to his great-great-great-great-grandfather, Abijah. 1 Kings 15 verse 3. It says he walked in all the sins of his father before him, and his heart was not perfect with God like David. Let's go to his great-great-great-grandfather, Asa. Asa says the high places were not removed. This is 1 Kings 15:14. But Asa's heart was perfect with God. Let's go to his great-great-grandfather, Jehoshaphat, which in 1 Kings 22 verse 43 says he walked in all the ways of Asa his father. He turned not aside from doing which was right in the eyes of the Lord, but he didn't take away the high places. Let's go to his great-grandfather, Jehoram. It says he wrought evil in the sight of Yahweh, and he put away the image of Baal, but he still did evil in the sight of Yahweh. And he cleaved unto the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, which made Israel to sin. Let's go to his grandfather, Ahaziah. He did evil in the sight of Yahweh, like the house of Ahab. Let's go to his father, Joash. Joash did that which was right in the sight of Yahweh, but he didn't take the high places away. And so now we come to Amaziah. Given the descriptions of all his forefathers, how would you expect Amaziah to be described in the record? Let's check it out. 2 Kings 14 verse 3. We've covered his history, and now we're covering him. Verse 3. He did that which was right in the sight of Yahweh, yet not like David his father. He did according to all things as Joash his father did, howbeit the high places were not taken away. As yet the people did sacrifice and burn incense on the high places. Of course, Amaziah is the sum of all the influences in his life. He's a mixture of all of them. He's actually lucky that he's described as someone who did the right thing in the sight of God, but he didn't take the high places away. He is the sum of all the influences in his life. Well, he did something straight away as soon as he was made king. Verse 5. And it came to pass, as soon as the kingdom was confirmed, look at that language, the kingdom was confirmed in his hand, he slew his servants. That's the first thing he did, which had slain his father. The second he had power, the servants were dead. That's a rather dramatic opening act, don't you think? The second he was king, he said, kill him. Who were these servants, I wonder? Well, 2 Kings 12 verse 21, let's have a look at it, tells us who they were. 2 Kings chapter 12 verse 21 tells us that Jozachar, the son of Shimeath, and Jehozabad, the son of Shomer, his servants, smote him. That's Amaziah's father. And he died. And they buried him with his fathers in the city of David, and Amaziah, his son, reigned in his stead. So Jozachar and Jehozabad. Now, our guy, King Amaziah, he's pretty steamed up that these two killed his dad, as verse 21 says. But not steamed up enough to kill their children. Have a look at 2 Kings 14 verse 6. The children of the murderers he slew not. Why? Why didn't he slay the children of these murderers? Well, because verse 6 of what was written in the law of Moses. Yahweh commanded, the fathers shall not be put to death for the children, nor the children be put to death for the fathers, but every man shall be put to death for his own sin. So well done, Amaziah. Good work. You followed God's will here. But is all as it seems? Could there be a little trouble behind the scenes here in paradise? Maybe things aren't as rosy as they appear on the surface. Let's take a closer look at the curious case of Jozachar and Jehozabad. Let's turn over to the parallel record, 2 Chronicles 24, verse 20, and see what really happened. In 2 Chronicles 24, verse 20, there is a man called Zechariah who the Spirit of God comes on. Who is Zechariah? He is the son of Jehoiada the high priest. Do you remember who Jehoiada the high priest was? Remember we said that Jehoiada was married to Jehosheba, and Jehosheba looked after Amaziah's father so that he didn't die? Remember Jehoiada proclaimed Joash the king at 7? Well, this is his son. The guy who looked after Amaziah's dad has got a son who stood up and said something. What did he say? He said in verse 20, he stood above the people and he said this. Thus saith God, 2 Chronicles 24, verse 20, why are you transgressing the commandments of Yahweh? You cannot prosper because you have forsaken Yahweh and he hath forsaken you. Sounds like a reasonable thing to say for a faithful man. But what happened? Verse 21, the people conspired against him and stoned him with stones. And look at the next words. At the commandment of the king, in the court of the house of the Lord. Unbelievable. Verse 22, Joash the king, the little guy that Jehoiada saved, remembered not the kindness which Jehoiada, Zechariah's father, had done to him, but slew his son. And when Zechariah died, he said, Yahweh, look upon it and require it. The story doesn't seem quite as rosy anymore, does it? Verse 25. And when they were departed from him, they left him in great diseases, that is Joash. His own servants conspired against him for the blood of the sons of Jehoiada the high priest, and they slew him on his bed, and he died, and they buried him in the city of David. But they buried him not in the sepulchres of the kings. That is why 2 Kings 14, verse 3, back to our reading, describes Amaziah this way. He did according to all things as his father Joash did, not like David, his father. You know, this is a story of a man who is struggling, and he's struggling with the forces that are influencing his life. Verse 5. 2 Kings 14, verse 5. He had his servants killed. Was it right? Was it wrong? I don't know. Verse 7. Something obscure happens. It's bizarre. 2 Kings 14, verse 7. He slew of Edom in the valley of Salt 10,000 and took Selah by war and called it the name of Joktheel to this day. That's just one little verse. It says so much. And then, as if it's nothing, we move on to verse 8. Totally different subjects. Like, oh yeah, he slew 10,000. He slew 10,000 in one day, and then next day he spoke to someone else. There must be more than that. There must be more that meets the eye than just that. And there is. Let's go back to Amaziah's great-grandfather, back to 2 Kings chapter 8, and find out what possibly influenced Amaziah to slay 10,000 Edomites. 2 Kings chapter 8, verse 16, which says, in the 5th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, Jehoshaphat being king of Judah, Jehoram, that's Amaziah's great-grandfather, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, began to reign. And what happened in the days of Amaziah's grandfather? Well, verse 20. Edom revolted from under the hand of Judah and made a king over themselves. Edom rejected Amaziah's great-grandfather as their king. And Edom crowned their own king. And Edom caused a lot of havoc for Amaziah's great-granddad. They caused havoc for him. I'll cause havoc for them. So he slew 10,000 of them. As you might imagine, there's a little bit involved in slaying 10,000 people. And there's no magic wand involved. And 2 Chronicles fills us in. Let's go back to 2 Chronicles 25, verse 5. Amaziah, he sets up captains over thousands and captains over 100. He's got 300,000 choice men who could handle spear and shield. But he did something else. Notice verse 6 of 2 Chronicles 25. He also hired 100,000 mighty men of valor from the army of Israel, and he paid them 100,000 talents of silver. So he's geared up. He's got the captains over the thousands, the captains over the hundreds. He's got 300,000 mighty men and 100,000 hired men from Israel. And out of the blue, 2 Chronicles 25, verse 7, an unknown, unidentified man of God pops up. He says, don't take the hired men. Amaziah, don't take those hired soldiers. He says, if you take those hired soldiers, God won't help you because they're from Israel and God is not with Israel. Don't take them. In verse 8, he says, if you do take them, you'll be defeated. In verse 9, Amaziah says, well, what about the money? I've already paid him 100,000 talents. And the man of God says, Amaziah, these famous words, God is able to give you much more than this. Don't worry about it. So Amaziah says in verse 10, go home, boys. Keep your money. Go home. But they were angry. Verse 10 says, these vigilantes, these mercenaries, these paid soldiers, they went home angry. Keep that in mind. 100,000 angry vigilantes didn't change Amaziah's mind. The prophet of God said, don't do it, and he didn't do it. Amaziah strengthened himself. He got in, he did the job, he smote 10,000 children of Seir. And sorry about this, a particularly gruesome bit now. There's an additional 10,000 Edomites still alive. 2 Chronicles 25, verse 12. And he got them, and he rounded them up, and he took them to the top of a cliff, and he pushed them all off. And it says, what does it say? They were all broken in pieces. So who is Amaziah influenced by? He's influenced by his father. He's influenced by the prophet of God. He's influenced by God. It's terrific. It's great. But what is going on, brothers and sisters and young people? Get this. Check it out. Verse 14, you won't believe it. It's difficult to read. Amaziah, verse 14, comes back from the slaughter of the Edomites. Can you believe this? It's hard to read what's written here in front of us. He brings back their gods, the Edomites' gods. He sets them up to be his gods. He bows down to their gods, and he burns incense to them. I nearly cried when I read that. Why is he doing this? Can anyone think of why he would do that? In this story of a man struggling with himself, struggling with his family history that got thrust upon him, struggling with the influences in his life, how does he get to this unbelievably, breathtakingly unacceptable position? Is that our story as well, brothers and sisters? And young people, do we do this? Can we do this? Do we acknowledge the hand of God in our lives? And in the middle of enjoying the benefits of God's hand in our life, do we turn around and make other things more important than God? Whatever is more important to us than God, That's what we worship. That's what we bow down to. And that's what we offer incense to. Even God is shocked, if I can use that expression. God asks him the question directly through the prophet. You have a look at verse 15. 2 Chronicles 25, verse 15. Why are you doing this? It's a great question. It's a question we ought to ask ourselves as often as necessary. Why are you doing this, Amaziah? Why are you seeking the gods of the people which could not deliver their own people from your hand and worshipping them? But you know, in this story, Amaziah has a crackerjack answer. What a top answer. Well done. Well done, Amaziah. What a well thought out answer. Verse 16. Here's his answer to why. Here it is. He says to the prophet, are you my advisor? Are you the king's counselor? Well, shut your mouth. It's a very clever answer, isn't it? So the prophet says, you are finished, Amaziah. Verse 16. God hath determined to destroy you because you have done this and not hearkened unto my counsel. This is exhausting, this story, isn't it? It's an exhausting story of a man struggling with God, isn't it? And what are we supposed to learn from this? Are we wondering what is influencing Amaziah here? Well, here's a verse that we skipped that might be a key to understanding some of this. Because Amaziah is us. Verse 13. He had that great victory with the Edomites. But remember the angry vigilantes? The soldiers that Amaziah turned back because the prophet of God said, no, go home. Verse 13, 2 Chronicles 25, verse 13. The soldiers of the army which Amaziah sent back, what did they do? They fell upon the cities of Judah on the way home. Who was Amaziah king of? Judah. Whose cities were these? Amaziah's. These were Amaziah's cities. From Samaria to Beth Horon, and smote 3,000 and took much spoil. Did this affect Amaziah? Did this influence Amaziah? You know, I wonder whether Amaziah developed this attitude of whatever. You're doing the right thing. You're trying hard. I took the right advice. And does it get you anywhere? No. What difference does it make? I listened to the prophet of God and I lost 3,000 lives as a result. And I wonder who here this morning has these pressing currents of doubt running through their mind from time to time. I know I do. You try and you try. And things still go badly. Do you think that's part of the reason why in the very next breath, out of the blue, Amaziah picks a fight with the king of Israel in verse 8? Let's go back to 2 Kings 14, verse 8. And he says to Jehoash, the king of Israel, in verse 8, come, let us look one another in the face. In other words, let's have a fight. Come and face me in battle. Why? What influenced him to do this? He had the victory over Edom. Did that cause him to be overconfident? Is he trying to seek vengeance because of the hired soldiers of Israel that plundered his cities? I don't know. Is it because of his current lack of motivation for God? I don't know. But Jehoash, the king of Israel, he's not backward in coming forward. 2 Kings 14, verse 9, Amaziah says, let's have a fight. And in verse 9, Jehoash, the king of Israel, says, listen here, Amaziah. I'm going to tell you a little story. Once upon a time, there was a despised thistle. It was a thorn bush in Lebanon. And this thorn bush said to the mighty and grand cedar tree, little thorn bush, grand cedar tree, why don't you give your daughter to my son to be his wife? But you wouldn't know it before anything could happen. Guess what? A rhinoceros walked past and totally destroyed the thorn bush. Gone. End of story. And Amaziah's going, what? And Joash is going, I'll tell you what, Amaziah, you smashed Edom. You're very cocky about that. My advice, have your glory and stay home. If it's not broke, don't fix it. Because you could fall and you could bring all of Judah with you. Would Amaziah listen? Oh, no. Can we imagine how Amaziah justified and rationalised his thinking? He's been given some good advice. Just stay home, buddy. No. You're an evil king, number one. God has helped me to defeat Edom, number two. God's on my side. The battle is going to be on my turf, number three. God would want me to punish you, number four. And Israel's done the wrong thing, number five. So, armed with that confidence that he was right about everything, he went up. And as he insisted, he looked Jehoash in the face, and Jehoash totally smashed Amaziah's army to bits. And not only that, verse 12, Judah fled. And not only that, Jehoash took Amaziah as a prisoner of war. And not only that, Jehoash comes to Jerusalem and smashes up 400 meters of the wall of Jerusalem just to let him know that he can. And not only that, he takes, verse 14, gold and silver and vessels from the temple. And not only that, he takes hostages. And just like that, it's over. But what happens to Amaziah, I hear you ask? Well, let's have a look what happens to Amaziah. 2 Kings 14, verse 17. 2 Kings 14, verse 17, yeah. In the end, he actually ends up living 15 years longer than King Jehoash. It could have been longer, but it wasn't. And the reason why it wasn't is something came up, and you wouldn't know it. Somebody's unhappy with Amaziah, as they are. So there's a plot to kill him. And verse 19, he escapes to Lachish, and they chase him to Lachish, and they kill him. But now it takes a bit of an interesting turn, the story. I find it's interesting. Notice, he gets buried with the rest of the kings in the city of David. And verse 20, they brought him on horses. And he was buried at Jerusalem with his fathers in the city of David. He gets the royal burial. But you know, the story still has one more detail, I believe, to deliver. An amazing detail to share with us about Amaziah. And it's in verse 21. And all the people of Judah took Azariah, which was 16 years old, and made him king instead of his father Amaziah. So Azariah, the son of Amaziah, becomes the king. You might say, yeah, great, that's what they did. What's so amazing about that? Well, Amaziah's son wasn't made king till Amaziah died. And if they didn't make Amaziah's son the new king until Amaziah was dead, tell me, who was the king of Judah after Amaziah was taken a prisoner of war? Was there a gap? He was taken prisoner of war. And it wasn't until he died that his son was made king. Amaziah's son was made king. Who's he replacing? He's replacing Amaziah. Only possible if Amaziah is the king again, in my opinion. He's back on the throne. He was a prisoner of war. But they made his son, verse 21, king instead of him. Amaziah regained his lost throne. God put Amaziah back on the throne. Why did God put Amaziah back on the throne? Because you can recover from humiliation and suffering. God's a God of second chances. He gives new starts. Now, Psalm 80 was not written about Amaziah, but it might as well have been. It wasn't written about us, but boy, does it apply. Let's close with some thoughts from Psalm 80. Psalm chapter 80, just summarising. Verse 2, come and save us. Verse 3, turn us again, O God, cause your face to shine. Verse 4, O Lord, how long will you be angry? Verse 5, we're crying. Verse 6, our enemies are laughing. Verse 14, we are your vine. Come and visit your vine. Verse 15, your right hand planted this vine, which is us. You made this vine strong for yourself. Verse 16, the vine has been burnt. The vine has been cut down. The vine has perished at the rebuke of thy countenance. Verse 17, let thy hand, God, be upon the man of thy right hand, upon the Son of Man who thou madest strong for thyself. The Son of Man who thou madest, Amatz Yah, or Amaziah, strengthened by Yah. You know, we're just about to consider the story of another man. Here's a man who struggled with himself. Here's a man who struggled with what happened to him. Here's a man who struggled with the unbelievable circumstances that were thrust upon him, but who never made any mistakes. He got everything right, and he only allowed the influence of his father to override all other influences. He was Amatz Yah. He was Amaziah, the strengthened of God. And I just pray, brothers and sisters, that when we have been influenced to finally abandon all this world has got to offer, that we'll hear the words one day from the man of God who says to us, Yahweh is able to give thee much more than this. Thanks, Brother Barry.